right there. So that I would suggest you check that out. But I think, really use your time here to really immerse yourself in the community. You have folks, students that go to MIT who hardly ever go to Harvard Square. It's like, oh, that's over there. You have Harvard students that hardly ever step out of Harvard Square, right? And I think that's a lost opportunity for them. Cambridge is go, volunteer at, Fresh Pond Reservation and learn about the environment and the nature that we have in the city. Go, work at, one of the food pantries and engage with folks who are coming in to get food because they need it. I mean, there's so much for opportunities for you to do that it would be a real loss to you to not take advantage of that.
Okay, thank you. As well, we would like to know if you can expect Mark as a state representative or Senate of Massachusetts.
Well, our friend, Marjorie Decker, that Bob mentioned, is the state representative in my district, so I'm not going to run against Marjorie. So maybe when Marjorie moves on to other things, I will consider a step up. But I'll tell you, I didn't really get into politics because I love politics so much, and I wanted to move up the ladder. I really got into it because I love this city. And the further you go up, the less connected you get with the people that you're serving, right? And I really love being mayor. So at this point, I'm pretty happy.
We have a question right here.
Hi. Hello. Okay, so I'm involved in certain volunteer groups already. Now I want to take it a step further by organizing my own. But at the same time, I might need the support of the government. So how do I go about getting the help of the support of the government and different organizations in my project?
So there are some laws around what municipal government can and can't do in terms of nonprofits. So for example, if you're starting a nonprofit, we can't just write you a check, right, to start your nonprofit. We could contract for a service, right? So there's an organization we do a lot of work with called Cambridge Economic Opportunity Committee, CEOC. And we have a large contract with them where they run the food pantries in the city, they provide a lot of services to the city, and for that, they get paid, right? So we would have to talk about what support you're looking for and what you need. We do have an organization called the Nonprofit Coalition, where we have helped to bring together almost all of the nonprofits in the city, and they have a committee that, they've elected people to sort of run that coalition. And they're sort of working together about how better to organize, coordinate, and support nonprofits in the community. So I'll leave you my card, and you can come talk to me, and I can figure out how to hook you up with those people.
Firstly, thank you for helping those people. In fact, I was working as a volunteer in Bird Street community last year. So I saw many people who need help there. So I wonder, your program is helping the Cambridge communities, or you also have some communities out of Cambridge, like in Big Boston, something like that?
So how are we helping them?
No, I mean, you only help the communities in Cambridge, or you also help some communities out of Cambridge?
No, it's only in Cambridge. So Massachusetts is a funny place in the sense that if you picked up Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Everett, Chelsea, we would probably all fit in most of the cities where you all are from. Okay? But here, we're these small cities, right? Boston is only 600,000 people, right? I mean, Manhattan is larger than that, okay? And we have our own forms of government, we have our own identities, we, in some ways, are in competition with each other, right? We want the businesses to locate in Kendall Square. Well, Somerville wants them to locate in Somerville, and Boston wants them to locate in Boston. So we basically, I don't really do programs in Boston. But I will say this, you know, we have to get better at thinking more regionally because we're all dealing with the same issues. So I have tried to do that. I brought together 2 years ago now, I brought together Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Everett, Chelsea, Medford, and Malden, which are these communities in the Metro Boston area, to have a Metro Boston conversation on homelessness. And we met 3 times to really talk about what does the homeless population look like in our community, what services do our communities offer, where are there gaps, or where are we overlapping, how can we better coordinate together. And we were able to sort of work together to kind of tighten things up so that we're providing more support. Because unlike, so I was in, a couple months ago, I was in San Antonio, Texas. And the nearest, oh, there you go, it was very nice. The nearest big city to San Antonio was Austin, which was 3 hours away, about, right? So homeless people in Austin are not coming to San Antonio for the day, right? It's too far. But in Cambridge, in this area, people who are homeless in Cambridge go to Boston for a little while. Then they go to Somerville for a little while. Then they go to Everett for a little while. Then Boston's homeless come to Cambridge and go to Somerville. So that population is very transient, and they go to many different communities on any given day. So, you know, we're not just in Cambridge. It's not just Cambridge is homeless. We have people from Boston. We have people from Somerville. So how do we coordinate better? Because these are all, they're all of our residents, right? And that is a very tricky thing to do here. Worcester, Massachusetts is 45 minutes away. In any other part of the country, and probably in a lot of places around the world, 45 minutes away would be either in the city itself or would be a suburb of the city. Worcester, Massachusetts, if you're coming from Cambridge, is like a day trip. You pack a lunch to drive 45 minutes. It's like the other end of the world. If I said to Bob right now, there's a great diner in Worcester, let's go have lunch, he would look at me like I was crazy, okay? We don't think regionally in Massachusetts, and we need to, because we're all struggling with many of the same issues.
Hi, so what concrete projects have you done to benefit the lower income people?
Sure. So a couple things we've done. So in terms of homelessness, we'll start there. You know, I tend to try to look at things in long-term and short-term goals, right? So we know that the way to address homelessness is to provide more housing. But that's complicated, right? And, you know, it's not as easy to do, especially in the city where Cambridge is only 6 square miles, and we're the eighth most densely populated city in the country. There's not a lot of land, right? So you hear about, you know, in Minnesota, they're building all these mini houses for I'd love to do that, I just have no place to do it. So that's long term. But there are people who are cold tonight and are hungry tonight. So one of the first things I did when I was sworn in as mayor in January was to invest over $300,000 in a warming center. And a warming center is a place for homeless folks who cannot get into a shelter or won't go to a shelter because shelters aren't very safe. And I said, well, these folks still need some place to go. So from November to April, we opened a warming center that's about 50 to 55 people, where homeless folks can go in, they can spend the night, they can get a meal, they can come and go if they want to. It's professionally staffed by social workers, so we can also help them get other services if they need them. I didn't want it just to be a warehouse, but they actually can connect with social workers and get services, so we did that. We, every year we invest money in purchasing sleeping bags and blankets and things like that we distribute to all the shelters and on the streets. We're looking now at an affordable housing policy where we would set aside a certain percentage of those affordable units specifically for folks who are homeless. So those are some of the things that we've done. The other thing with Cambridge is, so when I talked about Cambridge having a higher poverty rate than the state average, That's all based on the federal poverty guideline, and that's a national average. So a family of 4, if they make more than $24,500 a year, they're not considered poor. Now, try to live in Cambridge on a family of 4 on 24,000, you can't, right? So I started a task force that looked at what does it really cost to live in Cambridge. And so for a family of 4, just to pay rent and rent and utilities, a family of 4 needs to make $108,000 a year. So we have a lot of families that don't qualify under the federal standards, but they're still not making it. You could have a two-parent family making $100,000 a year, you have no money at the end of the month. You can't pay your bills on time, right? So I've tried to sort of broaden the safety net. So we have a fuel assistance program. So I'm working to broaden that, who qualifies for that program. And most of that money comes from the federal pot of money. But I'm working with adding money to the city to add money so that we can catch those people who are what we call income insecure. They're not in poverty, but they still don't have enough money. We just invested a couple $100,000 to offer free breakfast and lunch in our public schools. So right now, what we used to have was we had a free lunch program for families that were below the federal. We had paid lunch for families that made enough money, and then we had this thing called reduced lunch. And these were for families that didn't qualify for the federal money, but didn't make enough money. So I've eliminated that. All those kids are now getting free breakfast and lunch in the schools. It's about 1,000 kids that didn't have easy access to food that now do. And for a lot of those kids, that breakfast and that lunch is the best meal that they're going to get in the course of the day. So we just launched that. We just are, I'm about to launch, you guys don't know, I'm on video, okay, so we'll keep it between us and whoever's going to see this, because we haven't hammered out the details yet, but we're going to launch what's called a Children's Savings Account program. So for every child who registers in the Cambridge Public Schools, the City of Cambridge is going to open a college savings account for them with a $100 contribution, and then we're matching, if for every $100 that the family contributes, we'll contribute another 10. Because research shows that if a high school graduate has as little as $500, it's specifically designated for college, they are 3 times more likely to go. So now we're going to start this savings account program for every kid in the school district so that when they graduate from the Cambridge Public Schools, they've actually got some money to be used specifically for college. So that's sort of short and long term, right? That's not going to end poverty, right? But it is going to make a real meaningful difference in individual people's lives.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a couple more questions.
I'm sorry, I talk a lot. Long answers.
2 more questions before we wrap up. Hello. I wanted you to potentially expand on, you said that, I want to know what your process is offsetting the benefits of the new companies that come to Kendall Square and the almost inevitable displacement of the long-term residents that can no longer afford to live there.
Yeah.
Can you just expand on how you have worked to curtail that almost inevitable?
Yeah. So it's interesting because people talk about gentrification, right? And the reality is in Cambridge, this is not the first time the city of Cambridge has gone through a demographic shift. Most vibrant, thriving cities do. And so when you follow sort of the demographics of Cambridge, when we were a farming community for the first 150 years of our existence, we looked one way. When we were a manufacturing community for the next 100 and some odd years, we looked another way. That's where you saw a lot of immigrant populations. We weren't a terribly diverse community at first. We became a diverse community when factories started to open up and immigrants started to come here to work in those factories. Now, those factories are gone, and now it's biotech and pharmaceuticals, and now it's a different wave of people coming in. Some of them are immigrants, but economically it's different, right? So we've gone through this before, and although it brings challenges, it's actually, I think, a good thing, because you could drive across this country and find communities that were manufacturing communities, and manufacturing left, those jobs were never replaced, and those communities are not vibrant places to live. They're really, really struggling. So it's a challenge, but it's I'd rather have this challenge than having a community that's incredibly poor and can't support, its people. So around housing, I am sort of what you call a YIMBY, which is yes in my backyard, as opposed to a NIMBY, which is no in my backyard. So we're famous in Cambridge for this sentence. I support affordable housing, but, and then you can fill in the blank, but it'll cause too much traffic in my neighborhood. But the buildings will be too tall. But I got an email from someone in a certain neighborhood up near the Bob list, who said she didn't want any more housing built in her neighborhood because Whole Foods was too crowded already. Okay? So we find a lot of excuses, even good progressives in Cambridge, when they're asked to actually be part of the solution, they come up with reasons not to be. So everybody supports affordable housing, just build it somewhere else so that I don't have to deal with it. Right? So we'll see what happens in the next election for me, but I have been calling BS on that very vocally with people, and I say, no, you cannot do that. You cannot say that you respect the diversity of this city and then not be part in helping to preserve. So some of the things that we've done, there's something called a linkage fee, and that's for any company in Cambridge that builds a building over 10,000 square feet. They have to they have to give a certain dollar amount to the city that the city uses to preserve and create affordable housing. So for 20 years, that dollar amount was $4.56 a square foot. Okay? 2 years ago, we raised that to $15 a square foot. So we more than tripled the amount of money that these companies have to pay us so that we can preserve and create more affordable housing. We also have something called inclusionary zoning. And so in all of the housing that you see sort of being built around here, for any residential for-profit housing that is 10 units or more, a percentage of those units get turned over to the city for our affordable housing program. That percentage was 11.5% for about 20 years. I led the effort to raise that to 20%, which has generated hundreds, if not thousands, of new units of affordable housing. So those are some ways that we're trying to say, look, you're benefiting from being here. You're making a lot of money from being here. You need to do something to give back. Some of that can be done through partnerships and out of sort of the goodness of somebody's heart, but some of it has to be regulated and say to these companies, no, we're not going to wait for you to do this because you're nice. We're going to force you to do this. And so those are two of the things that I've worked on that have really changed the landscape in terms of affordable housing in the city. One more? You were right. Shout it out.
My name is Alexia, and I've been coming here. So I was just gonna ask, sort of based on what you said about your approach with Google, so basically applying that model to the schools in Cambridge, especially considering that the schools in the colleges in Cambridge, especially considering that these colleges include Harvard and MIT, which are so incredibly wealthy.
Right.
So I mean, basically, is there this attempt to like sit down with Harvard and be like, why don't you sponsor a Little League team, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Not exactly that, but whatever.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of, especially our schools do have partnerships with MIT and Harvard. Colleges are in Massachusetts, I think probably throughout the country, right, are considered nonprofit. So they don't pay property taxes to the city. So we don't get a lot of tax revenue, particularly with Harvard. MIT actually is the highest taxpayer in the city because MIT has a commercial for-profit real estate division. So a lot of the buildings you see in Kendall Square are actually owned by MIT. And they're non-educational use, so they have to pay taxes on that, but not on their educational use. So we don't get a lot of money from them. And so a lot of it is through trying to create partnerships. And I'll be honest, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's nothing happening, but I'm not sure there's enough happening with the universities. And, you know, it doesn't take a lot. So one of the things we just announced with MIT is MIT's building their new MIT museum. They're moving from sort of in Central Square where they are further down into Kendall. When that new museum opens, every resident of Cambridge will have free admission. So that's not a big deal to MIT. MIT's not going broke over that. But that's actually very meaningful to the people who live here for a number of reasons. One is certainly for low-income families that can now access a museum, a technology museum that maybe they weren't able to access before. But it's the message it sends, right? We're welcoming you. We want you to be here. We're encouraging you to be here. And they don't do enough of that. Harvard does almost none of that. And, you know, we can't force them to, and we certainly talk to them a lot about that. No, they definitely could be doing more. So I guess if anyone's interested, tonight at 6 o'clock, I see a lot of folks wearing rainbow stickers and whatnot. Tonight we are having at City Hall,